Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church. And I'm here today going to finish up our week on some random scriptures and ideas from those places. Today I want to look in Mark chapter 6, verse 45, actually, a story that's quite familiar to many of you. It reads this way. Immediately after this was immediately after feeding of the 5,000. And you probably know that story too. Jesus insisted that his disciples get back onto the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida, while he sent the people home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on the land. And he saw they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them, walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walk in the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. And then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped. And they were totally amazed, for they didn't understand still the significance of the miracle of the 5,000 loaves and 2 fish. Their hearts were too hard to take it all in. Well, this is probably one of the more dramatic stories in the Bible in Jesus' times. Here he was finishing up a miracle, and he's sending the disciples to the other side of the lake to move on, to get to the next thing. And as he sends the people away, and I guess it took a while for him to leave, since he goes up in the hills to pray, and he's praying for quite a while too. Then about 3 in the morning, he starts heading across the waves, the water, to get to the other side that the disciples have been working on for some time now. That's kind of crazy here because first thing we need to understand is that the disciples were doing exactly what God told them to do. They weren't somehow misusing his plans. They weren't being worldly and out of sorts with God. They were doing exactly what Jesus said to do. Get in the boat, go to the other side. And while they were doing that, a storm came up. Well, that's kind of like life, don't you think? You're living your life, you're doing what you're supposed to do, and then a storm comes up. And oh man, some of those storms are just earth shakers. Now, several of the disciples were experienced fishermen. They should have known what to do or not do, but it says they were all terrified. They were afraid. Apparently, this was a big, big storm. And Jesus saw they were in trouble. It says he intended to go to the other side, but he stopped. And when they saw him, they thought he was a ghost, and that made it even worse. When Jesus shows up to help, they get more afraid and more. So Jesus finally says to them, don't panic, take courage. I'm here. And he gets into the boat, and when he does, the storm stops. And then here's an interesting verse. They were totally amazed, for they didn't still understand the significance of the miracle of the 5,000, of the feeding of the 5,000. Their hearts were too hard to take it all in. Even though they saw the miracle, even though they experienced the stoppage of the storm, said they were just amazed. They couldn't believe that God would do that or could do it and then do it for them. It says Their hearts were still too hard to take it in. Now, I think this story describes your life and my life. Maybe we're not on a boat, maybe we're not out in the middle of a lake, but we are in the midst of living and doing what we think we should be doing or what we're trying to do with the best that we know how and so on and so forth. And in the midst of that, not in addition to, but in the midst of that, without any warning, a storm will come up. I've had storms in my life come up. I bet you have too. In fact, some of you might be in the middle of a really, really great storm. Now, what's significant here is not that Jesus stilled the storm. I mean, that's significant. But what's really significant is what he said. And what he said was, don't be afraid and take courage because I'm here. When we understand that when Jesus is here, it's going to be okay, regardless of what's going on around us. When we understand that we don't have to be afraid because Jesus is here, we experience a stillness of a storm like we've never imagined. Now, in the case of the disciples, their physical storm went away. In our lives, that physical storm or whatever catastrophe it is may not go away. But the key factor here is recognizing that Jesus is here. And because he's here, we don't have to be afraid. It goes on to say that they still didn't understand. Even in the midst of a miracle right in front of them, they still didn't understand. How many times have you and I not understood what God's trying to do, even when we see it right in front of us? Well, I don't know where you are in your walk with the Lord. I don't know where you are in your walk with today. Maybe it's wonderful. Maybe it's not so wonderful. But whatever it is, we find ourselves in the same boat as the disciples did here. And the only solution, the only offer that can still the storm is the presence of Jesus in our hearts and our lives. So I would like to invite you here at the end of this week in various scriptures. You think about, what does it mean to have Jesus in your heart? What does it mean to be able to be free from the fear of the storm because Jesus walks by? What do you think about that? Thank you for listening this week. It's been a good week. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. And I hope that you have a great, great weekend. I'll be back Monday with a whole nother set of ideas. So until then, if you have a need or a concern, let us know. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. Thank you so much, and God bless you. I'll talk to you again.